So the next logical step in kind of your composing or producing pipeline, if you were to call it that, is really setting up your project. It's kind of a bit of project management thinking, and it's thinking about how you'll progress and what you'll do and perhaps in what order. Now, depending on your preference at this stage, some people like to write in a reduced environment. So a classic example of that is just writing for piano and perhaps one lead line there. So you've got, maybe you can do that all with your voice and you at the piano, like with voice memos. So it's kind of like it's like a natural extension of the sketching stage, and then you do all the arranging or orchestration later on. Others, kind of like me, like to do a bit of both. So when I set up my template, as I'll show you in a second, what I do is I set up all the instruments that I think I want to use in this composition, so that they're there if I want to put anything down. However, when I'm composing, I still pretty much write on piano if I'm not sure how I'm going to arrange it. But if I'm writing a certain section and say there's a lead line where it's like, that is definitely a trumpet line, I'm going to put it on the trumpet part, and that's fine. The trumpet's there. I don't have to spend time going away, plugging in a hard drive, or updating an instrument if something happens. You want to avoid as much as possible the kind of a failure of ergonomics, and that sounds really pretentious. What I mean is that, like, we all find this thing, someone in the Lean Musician Facebook group mentioned the other day that, like, you'll be starting your project, be like, so inspired, I'm going to compose, and then, oh, I've got latency issues. Right, I have to sort that out. You want to make sure that none of that sort of thing happens whilst you're composing. And so setting up a template is a really, really good thing to do. And that works for Sibelius if you're working Sibelius as well. Then the next thing is kind of structuring your composition. Now, a lot of people, when I say this in the beginning, kind of go, but I don't know what this composition is yet. Why are you trying to tie me down? Now, it's a really good point, because the last thing we want to do is put barriers down for people. But think of a structure not as barriers, but really a framework that you can break out of later. There's a number of benefits to having this. Is one, it makes your whole task, i.e. the composition, have a finite boundary. You know that it's going to last roughly 4 minutes, it's going to have 7 sections, and it also tells you that you are going to be repeating sections, so that actually you don't have to write 4 minutes of music when you break it down. You actually have to write maybe 2, and then, you know, pretty much half of it is repetition with a few amendments. It can also then help you prioritize your work. So you say, what's the one thing, what's the one section that would help me unlock this piece fully? Usually, for example, the chorus or the hook. It might be the intro, or it might be the end. That's up to you to decide. So we're going to go into Logic now, and I'll show you just a brief example about how I might map out a composition, and you can think about your own way of doing it if you have a different DAW or perhaps Sibelius. So as I mentioned before, starting with a template is really pretty vital. And if you've worked with DAWs or any kind of software in general, you know that your template or your kind of your general starting point needs a fair amount of setup. So one of the things I have is multiple monitors and, for example, certain buses and aux and stuff like that. And so what I like to do is make sure that all of those are set up on my template straight away. That being said, when you're starting a new project, you probably don't want loads and loads of instruments in it, because you want to define what instruments you have. So you see here I've got selected here main template to empty, and this is usually what I do whenever I'm starting a project. So at the moment you can see that there's nothing in there apart from one synth, just as a placeholder really. And what I do probably first is bring in all the sounds from my soundboard that we looked at earlier, and slowly build up the track in roughly the audio that I've defined inside of my soundboard. So I'm going to do that now. So these are the tracks from my soundboard, and I've put them in the order that I kind of structured earlier. So you see that these aren't really relating to the tempo at the moment, I've just kind of put it in. What I like to do is work with markers here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call my intro. Sadly I can't play you any of these because obviously for copyright reasons, but there's various things going on here. We have Snarky Puppy, we have the Jacob Mann Big Band, we have the Lydian Collective, some Hans Zimmer I believe, and Bill Lawrence, that's it, great. Now, right now you're probably thinking, Jack, you have literally copied other people's music, not just a few, but like 7 tracks, and you are shamelessly going to copy every single one of them. That's not entirely true, and that is not why we're doing this. The whole idea of using these tracks as inspiration is really starting points or pastiches. You're not going to copy the chords, you're not going to copy the riffs, you might not even copy the groove. You're going to try and find your own way of representing what it is that you love about that genre and that style without copying it directly. It's a starting point. So we got intro here, and that's because I was listening to the Bill Lawrence intro to one of his tracks, and I was like, that is perfect. I want something like that for mine. So then you have a little think about it. You know, the most classic thing is obviously we've got an 8-bar intro. Let's stick with that for now. We can always change stuff later. You might want to call things verse if you're having stuff like that, or just call them section 1 if you can spell it properly. Section 1, or you could call it A, whatever. I'm going to call mine just letters of the alphabet now, right? And then I'm going to go forward again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Generally, just in the beginning, working with these sections in kind of like really simple 8-bar section phrases. You can always break up this kind of complexity later and make it kind of odd and stuff like that. But for now, we're just going to plan it out. So here I'm thinking, okay, we've had an A section, a B section, we've gone back to A, and then we have C. Now I'm going to challenge myself here just for fun. And again, this is the thing, remain flexible, invent this process as you go, adapt stuff. Don't just rigorously follow what I'm doing here. I've decided that I want to challenge myself and create a 2-bar transition from C back into A. So I just create that for myself and call it D. And then we say A again and we continue. Now, what you see obviously is that we've got some sections that we've defined as A, B. Obviously I've got a very short little bit there, but I know exactly what it's going to remind me to do in B. But we've now run out of sections. I've decided I'm going to keep this piece quite short and simple and traditional in the sense that you have kind of 3 sections, maybe a transition section and an intro and an outro. But I've got some kind of inspirational stuff left from my soundboard. Now, this is really important to keep around because it doesn't mean that all of these were just sections. It could mean that, you know, you've actually got these 2 kind of joining forces for the A section, and there's something about here, maybe it's the drum part, or in here maybe there's a particular amazing voicing or kind of like 4-part bit where you're like, yep, I really love that, I'm going to use that as well in the A section. So keep these around and roughly kind of plan it out for yourself, and then kind of give yourself a simple outro or ending bit. And what you have then is your reference tracks. Really, really important. And what you can do is you can put these, I tend to put these into a folder and mute them as well, so that I can use them later on. I can kind of, you know, whilst I'm composing and I've got all these other instruments down here, I go, okay, what was I trying to do in the C section again? What were my reference tracks doing? And I solo that and listen to it. So that's setting up your reference tracks. The next thing you obviously want to do is start building out your template. So one of my favorite places to start is obviously get a piano in there. Once I've got that in there, I might bring in drums, and then of course anything else that my project calls for. And once I've set up this template, the benefit is, of course, I can save this as a template in my file menu and use that for whatever next project or sketch I do that is similar to this. If you think of an album, you want the performing forces to be kind of roughly the same, so that if you want to at some point, you can take it on tour and have the same rough performing forces. Also, once you do all that work, kind of customizing that synth sound to be exactly how you want it, you want to be able to recall that really quickly, and templates are the best way. So we've structured our composition and set up a template. Now we're going to be ready to start writing.